to the Cultivated Life podcast. I am so glad you're joining me. I have some things to share with you tonight that I just can't wait to pour out. It's been kind of working up on the inside of me, and as the little kiddie song we used to sing used to say, it's bubbling, talking about the joy of the Lord. Well, this thought I have tonight, it's bubbling. I mean, it's really something that I'm looking forward to sharing with you. Let me just make mention, if you want to find out any more about the Cultivated Life, you can find out more about us at thecultivatedlifeministries.com, thecultivatedlifeministries.com. And there's information about Sharon and I and what we do and our books and podcast and all kinds of information there. So I encourage you to go there and find out more. Here's what I need you to do. Here's how you can help. We don't ask for money, but here's what you can do. You can share this. You can give me a like. You can give me a comment. All of that helps move the podcast into new areas and new territories. So in whatever way you watch this, whether it's or listen to this, whether it's Facebook or whether it's YouTube or some other way that you find this, let me encourage you to share that, all right? Well, we are talking about the 7 elements of biblical wisdom, and the way that wisdom works with wealth and prosperity. Now, I have this book that I put together. It's called Wisdom, Words, Wealth, Work, and Wickedness. What I did with this book is I took every verse in the book of Proverbs. I'm a huge fan of Proverbs because it is a wealth of information. No pun intended, but maybe pun intended. I don't know. It just came to me. All right. The book of Proverbs is a wealth of wisdom. And so I took every verse and I broke it up under one of those W's. Every verse is either about wisdom, words, wealth, work, or wickedness. Now, let me just share something with you from page 11. When I talk about wealth, is either a blessing or a test. And this is the challenge that happens a lot of times when we first tap into blessings. We get that first good job. We get that first good bonus. We get that first nice house, that first nice car. And it's either going to land on us as a blessing or a test. Let me just read something to you right here. Solomon's wealth was legendary. His palace, his fleet of ships, and the gold that flowed into his kingdom left visiting dignitaries like the Queen of Sheba in awe. Yet Solomon's Proverbs remind us that wealth is a tool, not an end in itself. Here's what it says in Proverbs chapter 3. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with your first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will be bursting with wine. That's from Proverbs chapter 3, 9 and 10. If you want to know more about the book of Proverbs and use this as maybe a study guide or just a devotional, I encourage you, go to the website, thecultivatedlifeministries.com, and you can order the book right from Amazon. You can pick it up right there. It's just an easy way. But let me encourage you. Now, let's jump into this. This principle was spoken into me, I feel like, by the Holy Spirit, and I've been thinking about this a lot. That's why I said earlier, I feel like it's just bubbling. It's just like it's just something that's working up in me. There's 7 points that I want to share with you that I think can really help you understand wealth, prosperity, abundance, and how all of this works from a God perspective, not a worldly or fleshly perspective. And that's the challenge, is most of us have the idea of wealth or prosperity or abundance. We get it through the eyes of the world. We get it through the desires of the flesh. And it's really important that we understand what we can learn from Scripture about how to view these things through a biblical worldview. Every part of your life, if you're a believer, every part of your life should be covered with a biblical worldview, including abundance, wealth, finances, blessings, favor, all of that kind of stuff. So let me give you 7 things, and I'm going to tie these into Israel moving into the promised land. So let me give you a little backstory on that. Israel had been in bondage in Egypt for 400 years. So a biblical generation is considered 40 years. So for 10 generations, they had been in bondage. And then Moses comes in. Remember the story. Moses comes in and says, let my people go. And then there's the plagues. And then they get out of bondage. And then they wander through the wilderness for 40 more years, an entire generation, to get to the promised land. Now, when they arrive at the promised land, here's what God said. He said, I'm going to give you houses you didn't build. I'm going to give you vineyards you didn't plant. I'm going to give you cities that you didn't put there. I'm going to give you all of this stuff. And so he promises them this abundance. Now, here's what I have found out is if you don't know how to make money, you're probably not going to know how to keep money. This is why most people, we are getting ready to step into the largest transition of wealth in recorded history, somewhere in the area of 80 or 90 trillion dollars in the next 20 years is going to go from one generation to the next, right? And what happens in that transition is that 80%, listen to this, 80% of the second generation will lose the wealth of the first generation because they didn't make it, they don't know how to make it, and they don't know how to keep it. That's just a stat. It's not a judgment. It's just a statistic that we can look at over history and say this is how wealth is gained, and then this is how wealth is lost. If you can come into the biblical understanding, a biblical worldview, you not only have the ability to gain and develop wealth, you also have the ability to maintain and keep wealth. And when I say keep, you'll understand what I mean as we go into this. So as Israel moves into the promise of God, there is also this abundance of wealth, cities they didn't build, houses that they didn't build, vineyards they didn't plant, stuff that they didn't put together, but it was all given to them by God. And now their job was to not only maintain it, but to figure out how to develop it for the ongoing generations. So, number 1, are you ready? Let's go through 7 principles that I think can help you understand biblical financial prosperity. Number 1, the power of risk. The power of risk. They say that faith is a 4-letter word, right? Many times when you hear the 4-letter word, you're thinking of a bad word, a cuss word we're not supposed to say, which I don't, and you shouldn't either. Nevertheless, I digress. But risk is faith. Faith is risk. Faith is a requirement for financial growth. Ecclesiastes 11 gives us this principle, verse number 1, that if we cast our bread on the water, it'll come back to us. Watch this, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. Now, I'm not a baker, but I've watched a show or two. Come on, somebody. I don't know what it means to make a cake from scratch, but I've watched a show or two, and they will take the flour, and if you just pour flour into a container, it'll look full, but if you shake it, it'll start to settle down. If you shake it, you can actually pour more in. And this is what the scripture is referring to when it says pressed down, shaken together, and then running over. Because what it's showing is the increase or the abundance of room that you create in your life when you cast the bread on the water. So Israel steps out of Egypt. They're making this journey. Then they step into the promised land. And this is where they begin to see the fullness of the promise of God. Sometimes stepping into financial increase requires faith. This is why most billionaires, I just heard this stat this week. I don't know why I heard it, where it came from. I'm sorry. Most billionaires have gone bankrupt 3 times. Now, they have the opportunity to see themselves as a failure, or they have the opportunity to see themselves as, I'm making room, I'm learning, I'm progressing, I'm going forward. Without the element of faith, Hebrews 11 says you can't please God, and if you don't please God, you have no opportunity for financial wealth and abundance and prosperity. Number 1 is so important. It is the power of risk. Now, the number 2 is the wealth of generosity. Now, those 2 words, wealth and generosity, seem to be polar opposites. You can't have wealth and generosity. If you're generous, you give away all your wealth. If you're wealth, you're not generous. But the wealth comes through generosity, and this is a giving key to biblical prosperity. Luke chapter 6 says in verse 38, give and it will be given to you. Give and it will be given to you. Another verse that you may have heard before is, it's more blessed. You're more blessed if you give than if you just receive all the time. Now, Israel, God told them that he said, I don't want you just to be a consumer. God told Abraham, he said, from you, I'm going to raise up a people and they're going to be a blessing to all the other people. Abraham didn't even have a son. And he says, I'm going to not only give you a son, I'm going to give you a nation, a people, and they're literally going to be a blessing to all the other people groups of the entire world. Here's the reality, is that a closed hand can never receive the promises of God. You have to have the open hand. You have to be willing to give if you want to receive. This is called stewardship. This is called simple stewardship. Sharon and I have this philosophy about the open hand concept, and that is we hold all things, people, property, and provision. People, property, provision. Everything that God puts in our hands, people, property, provision. This is what we hold with an open hand, so that when God says, now you got to give that, or now you have to share that, or now you have to move that into another place, we're not fighting for it like you're not going to have it. Nope, I'm not going to let it go. Because we hold all things with open hands. It's called stewardship, and we steward what God puts there, but we do not fight when God calls us to give it away. All right, number 3. Number 3 is the strength of restraint. The strength of restraint. Self-control in all finances, but obviously in spending, is a discipline. Discipline comes from the root word disciple, and we are called to be disciples, and that disciple concept leads us into the idea of discipline. Proverbs chapter 21 and 20 says, precious treasure and oil are in a wise man's dwelling, but a foolish man devours it. I want to read that again. Precious treasure and oil, which oil was a high-cost commodity. They're in a wise man's dwelling. In other words, he knows how to hold on to what God's given him, but a foolish man just eats everything he's got. He devours everything. Just as Israel had to be resistant or restrain themselves from idolatry in Canaan. Remember, they're walking into the promised land. They're walking into the blessings of God. Cities they didn't build, houses they didn't build, vineyards they didn't plant. And there's also all of the idolatry there. God says you don't worship another God. God says, you don't serve any other gods. You are my people. I am your God. This is a covenant relationship. And the call to excess is different than the call to abundance. Excess is self-focused. I want what I want. But the abundance mentality is for the greater good. God has given it to me for the purpose of the greater good. How do I bless others? How does my generosity work? How do I save? How do I give? How do I tithe? How do I understand the biblical principles of prosperity? Jesus gives us this parable when he talks about the man who built bigger barns. And the man had great wealth, and he had to make a decision. He said, either I'm going to lose all this, that was his mindset, or I have to build bigger barns. He missed the point of generosity. For him, it was all about winning and losing as opposed to winning and winning, because generosity always leads you to a win-win. You are blessed for being the blessing, and the person or the ministry or the church or whatever you're giving to is also blessed. And so instead of the man seeing that third option, he saw, I lose it all, it just lays there and rots. I build bigger barns and I save it, rather than saying, you know what? There's a third option that I have. All right. Number 4, the peace of abundance. Man, this is a good one. The peace of abundance. True wealth brings peace, not stress. I want to say that again. True wealth, true biblical financial prosperity brings peace, not stress. Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 22, the blessing of the Lord makes rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. It is not God's plan for you to get blessed and be filled with abundance and have financial prosperity and then just be wringing your hands and fretting and worrying and checking your bank account every day, all day, and just following every move of the stock and trying to just, what's going to happen? What if this happens? What if that happens? And that's not God's plan. He wants you to have the blessing and the prosperity and the wealth, but only that which comes with peace. And if our wealth creates stress, fear, greed, we may have put our trust in the wrong thing. If your trust is in the Lord, you have peace with your wealth. If your trust is in your wealth, you have fear, you have greed, you have stress. When God is the source, we rest in his provision. I want to say that again. When God is the source, we rest in his provision. The joy of enough. That's number 5. Number 5 is the joy of enough. Contentment is foundational to financial stability. If you can't be happy with where you are, you probably ain't going to be happy for where you're going. I've had people literally pack up and move like across the country for $2 more an hour or some idea of something that they could have because they weren't content with what they had. And then they get there and realize the cost of living is more, and I'm away from family and I'm away from friends and I don't have a church. And 1 Timothy, Paul writes to Timothy in chapter 6 and verse 6, and it says, godliness with contentment is great gain. If you have godliness, but you're not content, you're not going to go anywhere. If you somehow land in this place of contentment without godliness, you're going to get stuck. It's when you understand the balance of godliness and contentment that you are able to really experience the great gain that God has for your life. The Israelites were not content with the manna they had in the wilderness. They just couldn't be satisfied. It was supplying their needs, and they just complained about it. They complained about everything. I mean, they complained from the time they left Egypt because they couldn't get content. When they get into the promised land, they just put themselves into situations that they never get ahead because they don't understand the balance of godliness and contentment, because discontentment will drive us toward excess or envy. Did you see that? If we don't settle into, I've got a good life. I remind myself of that probably more than once a day. I would venture to say more than once a day. I will remind myself when I'm driving down the road in my van that has 120 or 30,000 miles on it, and I could look at, another vehicle and say, oh man, if I just had that. And sometimes I do see a vehicle and I'll make a comment to Sharon about how beautiful the lines on that vehicle are, or, look how that thing sits, the posture of that vehicle, because that's the way I like to look at cars. But then I just stop and say, man, I thank you, Lord, that I've got a great van. I've got a nice vehicle to drive. It gets me from A to B. I mean, Sharon and I just look around at the blessings. We'll be just, sitting at the house and we'll just be like, look at all that God has blessed us with. Is there a bigger house? Oh, yeah, there's definitely a bigger house. Is there better stuff? Yeah. Is there a bigger TV? Yeah. Is there something we could want? Oh, yeah, there's plenty of things we could want, but we have determined we will be content with where we are. And because of that, we experience the blessings of the Lord. Now, here's number 6, the beauty of balance. Now, this one here is really, really important. The principal scripture for this thought is in Ecclesiastes 3, that in everything there is a season, there is a time for every matter under heaven. Seasons, times, it's finding a balance. God lets us go through seasons, and our job is to find the balance in every season. Just as Israel had to balance between warfare and rest, just as Israel had to balance between what they were headed toward and where they were, they had to process and go through. This is the beauty of them being led by the pillar of fire by night and the cloud by day. And if you're not familiar with this story, go back into Exodus and read this, because it is absolutely just a beautiful story. How that we say they wandered in the wilderness, that's our language, but really they were being led through the wilderness. And God would move the fire by night or the cloud by day, and they would walk, and then God would stop. And when God would stop, they would stop. God was teaching them how to go and how to stop. When you think about your wealth and you think about your blessings, think about this. You need balance in 3 areas. You got to take 3 elements, all right? Just think of a triangle. You got 3 elements that you have to balance. And a 3-legged stool is a good way to kind of posture yourself here. You have to balance your savings. You have to balance your spending, and you have to balance your giving. You have to figure out what is the balance of those 3 things in my life. I keep doing this in front of my face, right? Sorry about that. I'm just making all these hands motions right in front of my face. I should be doing it out here, right? This is why you need a budget. A budget will help you find the beauty of balance. Do you see all those B's in there? The budget, the beauty, the balance. Man, I'm telling you what, I ought to start preaching for a living. I'm telling you what. That's what a good preacher does. A good preacher will come up with a bunch of B's or a bunch of different P's or L's or Q's or something, and man, he'll make a good sermon out of that. But anyway, so when you find that balance, what will happen is you will start to have seasons where you will have sacrificial giving, and then other times you'll need to save wisely, and then other times you'll need to figure out, okay, we're going to spend money here. But if you create a balance in your life, then it softens the blow in all of those elements, right? So when you do have to spend, it's not like you're down to 0. Or when you are giving, you're not giving away 100% of everything you have. Or when you are saving, you're not saving everything and not paying bills, and so on and so forth. So the biblical approach to finances recognize that prosperity is not about extremes, it's about balance. It's not about extremes. The idea of tithing is not about equal giving, it's equal sacrifice. This is why God is it's so amazing how God lays things out like this. Is the idea of tithing is if you make, $500 a week, or if you make $5,000 a week, we're all giving the same. not the same number, but we're all giving the same percentage, 10%, because that's how tithing is meant to work. It's balanced in the way God calls us to covenant. Now, here's number 7. Number 7 is the courage for diligence. The courage for diligence. Proverbs 13:4 says, the soul of the sluggard, the lazy person, craves and gets nothing. So the soul of a lazy person says, I want everything, but they're not getting anything because they can't get off the couch. They can't get out of the bed. They can't show up at work. They can't be diligent in their lifestyle of saving. They can't be diligent in their lifestyle of giving. They can't be diligent in their lifestyle of budgeting. All of these things that are so important. Proverbs 13, the wise man goes on to say, all right, here it is. We're going back to Proverbs. We've mentioned Proverbs a number of times because there is a lot of information in the book of Proverbs about wealth and the importance of how we get it, how we spend it, how we save it, how we, how we handle it, how we deal with the wealth, all right? When we think about this, Israel was given the land, but they still had to fight for it. Now that sounds like a paradox. Wait, either you're going to give it to me or I'm going to have to fight for it. Here's the way I see it. God will give you a job, but you have to show up. Come on, somebody. God will give you a blessing, but you have to steward it. God will give you a car, but you have to maintain it. God will give you a house, but you got to keep that grass cut. See, there's this thing that happens. I think that sometimes when people think about abundance and from a biblical perspective is that I'm going to win some kind of biblical lottery and I'm just going to scratch off on a Sunday, the ticket, of blessing, and then I'm just going to get all this money. But financial prosperity is not just about receiving blessings. It is also about working diligently, and those two go hand in hand. Working diligently and understanding how the blessings of God work. Now, let me wrap it up with this. I didn't keep you long because I dropped a boatload of stuff on you tonight, and I think there's probably a thing or two you're going to want to go back and you're going to want to dig a little deeper on, and that is, think about it like this. Every learning point, that's not the best word. All learning has a learning curve. Does that make sense? All right, learning curve. I know that's a good phrase. I think it fits right here, and I hope it means a learning curve. So when you figure out how to do something you've never done before, there's a learning curve. It takes a while to figure out. Oh, there's a cheat code for this, or I can do this, or I can do that, and it makes the job easier, or it makes the job work with more fluidity. Okay, so there's that learning curve. Think about this. What I've shared with you tonight, I don't think you can actually take all 7 of these and tomorrow be like, bam, we got it. All right, we're done. We're good to go. I think that these principles that I've given you in this session tonight is about a learning curve that will be built over time into your lifestyle through faithfulness. If you will take these principles, you may even want to copy and paste them, just write them out, take the notes, drop them somewhere where you can go back and rehearse them. Probably in the next few weeks or next few months, I'll be putting together a book with some of these in them that can kind of help you. But in the meantime, I want you to start thinking about this and how can I build a learning curve into my life around prosperity and prosperity blessings, the finances, the abundance, the wealth of the kingdom, all of that. 2 Peter chapter 1, here's what it says in verse 5. For this very reason, so this is a general letter that Peter is writing to all believers, and he says this, for this very reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue, and with virtue add knowledge, knowledge with self-control, self-control with steadfastness, steadfastness with godliness, godliness with brotherly love, and brotherly love with a brotherly affection with love. Now, the reason I read that is I wanted you to see this is a biblical principle of process. That's why I'm telling you this is a journey of understanding. There's a learning curve here. And so when Peter writes this, he literally shows us the layers of biblical processing and how to add things to your life in general. But what I've shared with you is how to add things into your finances and into your understanding of abundance and into your knowledge about financial prosperity from a biblical worldview. And if you will do that, you will literally cultivate in your life a mindset that may be completely different from everything you've ever seen or heard in your family, in your friends, in the people in your sphere of influence. But because you have taken step 1, and then you have added step 2, and you have added step 3. All right? I want you to grow in grace and knowledge, and that's why we share these things. Again, find out more information about us at thecultivatedlifeministries.com. You can order our books there. Let me go back and just read one more thing before we go when we talk about wealth from the perspective of the book of Proverbs. It has been said in jest, I have been rich and I have been poor. Rich is better. While wealth can bring great opportunities, it also brings temptations. Late in Solomon's life, his wealth and success led to compromises as he allowed idolatry to enter his household through his foreign wives. This is from 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 4. This serves as a warning. Now, the reason I'm giving you this is because it's so tempting that once you start to get a little bit in your pocket, you get distracted. When wealth distracts us from God, it becomes a snare rather than a blessing. That's why I started this talking about it's either a blessing or a test. It's either going to be for your good or it's going to be a snare that's going to trap you. Hey, let me encourage you. This is not prosperity gospel. I'm not telling you everybody's going to be getting a new car, and I'm not promising you everybody's going to be living in a new house. I'm just telling you there are some principles in the Bible, there are some principles in the book of Proverbs that can help you understand the abundant lifestyle through the biblical worldview, and I want you to jump in and find those out. All right, let me say a prayer for you before we leave. Father, I thank you for every person that's watched or listened to this podcast today. And I thank you for the opportunity for us to learn and to discover principles in your word. And now, Lord, I'm asking you that you would bless every one of them and help us to go deeper, to develop, to walk in those processes. And Lord, let us find that learning curve. Yeah, that learning curve, and let us step into it and develop everything you've called us to be in Jesus' name. All right, God bless you guys. Leave me a comment. Give me a thumbs up. Do something fun in those comments down there and say what you've learned. Love you guys. I look forward to seeing you again real soon.